Okay. Um, okay, so we are live. Today I'm going to be talking about the what's the healthiest diet. Let me see if I have any on with me right now. I have no viewer. That's okay. Okay, so what's the healthiest diet? We're going to be talking about three diets in particular, and the reason that we're going to be talking about them is because, unless we live under a rock or in a forest, there's a obesity epidemic in obviously America, but North America, in particular Canada also. Now, the three diets that we're going to be comparing today are the three diets for their diets for weight loss. But if anyone wants to be healthy, they shouldn't be obese. So that's why we're going to be looking at these three diets. Because otherwise, people don't usually go on a diet. Unless it's like they're avoiding a particular thing for a specific health reason. So the three diets we're going to be comparing are low-fat diet, low-carb diet, and the Mediterranean diet. And the three, hi Natalie, and the three things that we're going to be comparing these three diets around are type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and adherence, which just means how easy it is to follow the diet. So we're going to be comparing the low-fat diet, low-carb diet, Mediterranean diet, and we're going to be comparing these three based on their effect on type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and adherence, and how it impacts weight loss, because that's why people go on diets, usually. Okay, so the low-fat diet. Before 2008, the American Health Association recommended the low-fat diet. Since then, they have stopped recommending the low-fat diet. Low-fat diet consisted of, if you looked at the macro breakdown of nutrients, 60% carbohydrates, 20% fats, and 20% proteins. This has a high glycemic load, just means high carbs, which is not great for regulating blood sugar levels. And based on these three macros of 60 carbs, 20 fat, 20 protein, women in the study were given 1,500 calories and men 1,800 calories on average. And as we kind of talked about before in previous weeks, having a lower calorie diet is going to make you lose weight no matter what. So 1,500 for women and 1,800 calories for men is a good amount of calories, but it's probably going to make people lose weight generally, because usually people are overweight and they eat more than that. The low-carb diet, after 2007, literature started focusing on diets like the Atkins diet, which is a primarily low-carb diet, and a low-carb diet's macro breakdown is 10% carbs, 60% of your calories are coming from fat, and 30% of your calories are coming from protein. And this has a low glycemic load, which just means low impact on your blood sugar variations, just because there's very low sugar levels or carbohydrates. And the diet that looked at the study that looked at the low carb diet had no calorie restrictions. And except for the restriction was that carbohydrates were restricted from 20 to 120 grams of carbohydrates, which is less than 20 is very low. Less than 120 is pretty low, but doable for people. But you also have to remember that carbs in these kind of diets are including vegetables, including everything like that. So they're not having like 4 slices of toast and then everything else is meat or fat. It's like they're looking at their whole diet, and less than 120 to 120 less than 20 to 120 grams of carbs with low carb diet's restriction. Mediterranean diet, So if you haven't heard of blue zones are areas in the world that, for whatever reason, there's debate on why, they have a longer life expectancy. The populations do. So some of these places are in the Mediterranean. Some of the blue zones are in the Mediterranean, others are not. That's what is so difficult with the low carb diet, is that you can't eat as much fruit and veggies as you'd like. I love fruit and veggies. Yeah. So we're going to talk about adherence later. But spoiler, I don't think it matters if I say this or not, but the low carb diet had the lowest adherence just because it's so difficult to live a life that you're having pretty much no carbs or very few carbs in the long term. You can do it for a day and whatnot or two, but if you want to live a balanced life and enjoy your life and like go out for dinner once in a while and stuff like that, it's very difficult. Okay, so the Mediterranean diet, the blue zones are people that live longer in places like Sardinia and in Italy and Crete and Greece, are islands that have maintained a traditional Mediterranean diet for the most part, and they have better health outcomes. So the Mediterranean diet looks at the Mediterranean diet study had a 50% of the calories are coming from carbohydrates, 35% of the calories are coming from fats, and 15% of the calories are coming from proteins. It's also important to note that with the Mediterranean diet, the 50% calories from carbohydrates are primarily vegetables, legumes, and things that are high in fiber. And then the fats are healthy fats, so like olive oil, avocado, things of that sort. And by doing this, by having a 50% carbohydrate, 50% of your calories coming from carbohydrates, but they're being healthy carbohydrates, give a moderate glycemic load, which is good for controlling diabetes and for things like diabetes. And the calorie restriction was similar to the low-fat diet, actually the same as low-fat diet, with having 1,500 calories for women and 1,800 calories for men. And so if you look at the weight loss between the three, it shows that the worst at losing weight was the low-fat diet, and you could argue that's because there was no calorie restriction. It was just restricted on so the lowest calorie, the group that lost the most weight was the low carb diet, but it was not significantly different than the Mediterranean diet, and the group that lost the least weight, which long term, which is significantly different than both the Mediterranean and the low carb diet, is the low fat diet because of adherence problems. I know I kind of said that confusingly, but if you look at the initial part of the time frame, the low carb diet lost the most weight, and you could argue that's because of water weight. The other two diets, being the Mediterranean diet and the low fat diet, lost relatively the same amount of weight, and that's you can argue because of the calorie restrictions being similar. And then if you go long term, so this study was 24 months long, you see that the Mediterranean diet and the low carb diet have the very close and insignificant differences in weight loss, while the low fat diet comes back up because people were not calorie restricted. So the heart disease, for looking at lipid profiles, it's important to keep in mind for cardiovascular disease. So the winners for keeping in check the bad fats in HDL it shows that there was a non-significant difference between the low carb and the Mediterranean diet, being that they lowered the HDL, and the low fat diet was not good at sorry, one sec. Sorry, okay, so the low carb diet increased HDL the most. The Mediterranean diet decreased LDLs the most, and the low carb Mediterranean diet decreased triglycerides the most, which made, and if you sum all these up, the low carb and Mediterranean diet were not significantly different in controlling the lipid profile of the in the study, and the low fat diet didn't do as good of a job. So the and that's one of the reasons the the Association for what's it called? The American Health Association stopped recommending the low-fat diet because it didn't actually show to be better for lipid profiles. Because you need healthy fats, not just avoiding fats. Okay, so now for heart disease, there's a 2013 study that looked at the adherence and looked at the risk relations to cardiovascular disease and death. And the low-fat diet showed a 79% reduction in cardiovascular disease, while the Mediterranean diet showed a 81% reduction in cardiovascular disease, and the low-carb diet showed a 64% reduction in cardiovascular disease, which shows that if you look at 81 to 79% reduction in cardiovascular disease over a 12-year follow-up, the low-fat Mediterranean diet were not significantly different in preventing cardiovascular disease, while the low-carb diet was significantly different compared to the Mediterranean and low-fat diet, and that it was not as good at preventing cardiovascular disease long-term. For diabetes, the risk of developing or coping with type 2 diabetes is an important component to keep in mind when following a diet. So if you look at the for non-diabetics, between the three diets, there was no different in their fasting glucose levels. But for diabetics, the Mediterranean diet showed significantly different results compared to the fat and the low fat and the low carb diets, and that after 24 months, and there was no significant difference between the low carb and low fat diet when looking at diabetic or the fasting glucose levels of diabetics after 24 months. So for diabetes, the Mediterranean diet is the for diabetics, the Mediterranean diet is the best at controlling their blood sugar levels and reducing their fasting glucose, which just shows how they're controlling their glucose levels. Now, adherence, a dilemma with diabetes where they're sustainable long term. So if you look at the withdrawal rates within the main study that I'm talking about, there was a significant difference between the literature shows that how low carb diets repeatedly have higher attrition rates and are harder to follow long term. They had the highest attrition rate with it's not a percentage, but with double the amount of people in the low carb diet withdrawing from the study compared to the low fat Mediterranean diet, which is no good. So it shows that for adherence, the hardest of the three diets to follow between low fat, low carb, and Mediterranean is the low carb diet. Now, if you sum up all these winners and losers that I've been talking about, the Mediterranean diet is the easiest and the healthiest diet to lose weight and also looking at all the different factors of weight loss, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and adherence, Mediterranean diet is the best one. So for weight loss, the low-fat diet was not the best diet, and the low-carb and the Mediterranean diet were tied if you looked at significant statistical significance. Cardiovascular disease, the low-fat diet and the Mediterranean diet were tied in that they were not significantly different, and they reduced the rates of cardiovascular disease, while the low-carb diet increased the risk of cardiovascular disease. For diabetes, the low-fat diet was the loser of the three because it didn't control diabetes compared to the other two, and the Mediterranean diet was the best at reducing the fasting glucose levels, so it's the best at controlling diabetes. And for adherence, the low-carb diet was the worst because it was hardest to adhere to, and it had twice the amount of attrition rate compared to the Mediterranean and the low-fat diet. And that's all I was hoping and planning to talk about. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I also want to note that the Mediterranean diet is the easiest to follow, and it's the healthiest and likely the most fulfilling and balanced diet. So if you don't know what the Mediterranean diet is, if I was able to show PowerPoint, I would show like the breakdown of food. Yeah. So Natalie said the Mediterranean diet really, the Mediterranean diet really does seem the most workable / ideal and healthiest. Yeah. So if you Google like a food pyramid of the Mediterranean diet, the bottom is fruits and vegetables. Then there's the different fats and legumes. Fish is the main source of protein, and it's not too much protein because a lot of the American diet or the low carb diet is heavy protein, which can also lead to debatable different health issues. And then if you look at the quality of the calories, breads are at the top of the pyramid, meaning that there's less of them, because if it's a food pyramid, you're eating more of what's at the bottom compared to the top. And the very top is like red meat or wine, so it's not restricting those, but it's you're eating those less. Because people in the blue zones, or people that live in the Mediterranean, or in the blue zones in the Mediterranean in particular, don't have access to red meats as much, but their sources of protein are mainly fish, which are healthier, and usually easier to find healthier sources of in our modern world, harvesting and growing and hunting or catching them. Low-fat one just didn't work for me because I was always ending up going to carbs. Yeah, so the other thing is the important part of any eating regimen is the satiety we kind of talked about in previous weeks of the food you're eating, to keep you from not continually to snack. And the Mediterranean diet having high fiber content and vegetables and things of that sort that are keeps you full in the fiber, and then the vegetables keeping you the vegetables being lower calorie compared to their density of calories, and other things like I don't know, compared to other things, keep you having a lower calorie diet, just in innate in what the diet is, without feeling hungry. And Danielle says she loves the Mediterranean diet. Natalie, me too. Yeah. So if you haven't tried the Mediterranean diet, or you don't even, it's not really something you try. It's just thinking more consciously of what would fit into a Mediterranean diet lifestyle, or Mediterranean lifestyle. Just Google it, look it up, see what the types of foods, and try and incorporate them more in what you're eating. And long term, your health will benefit. It's easier to adhere to, so long term you should be able to follow it better. What about the keto diet? So the keto diet is to my understanding a low carb diet, right? Maybe if Danielle can respond. Okay, so to my understanding, the keto diet is a low carb diet because it brings you into ketosis, um, which means your body's burning fats, not carbs. Keto diet is pretty much what the low fat diet that we were talking about. Adherence is very hard. And to be actually in the state of ketosis, the low-fat diet that we talked about today in the study was 20 to 120 grams of carbohydrates. To be in the state of ketosis, you actually have to be, I think it's less than 40 or 50 grams of carbs, and that also depends on how much energy you're burning. So it can allow people to lose weight, burning ketosis, burning fat, but studies show that a ketogenic diet, like we talked about, it's harder to adhere to. But then a lot of people come and put the fat back on because they can't live a life that they're eating less than 50 grams of carbs a day. Just because there's carbs and vegetables and things of that sort. So being on a real ketogenic state is very hard to do. It is hard to follow, so I just cut back on carbs, which makes a big difference. Yeah. So so one of the things that we talked about originally was the 3 levers of any diet, and cutting back on pulling one of those levers at any time is important. So if you're consciously thinking, I'm going to lower my carbs, that's fine. Do that. I don't think you need to lower them to 10 grams of carbs a day, because that's very little, or 20 grams of carbs a day. But if you're used to eating, I don't know, 2 bowls of pasta a day, it's probably not a good thing. So maybe cut back on your carbs and have 1 bowl of pasta. So things like, just don't do anything in excess. So if there's things that make you want to lower different things, then that's good. Yeah, it's very tough long term. Yeah, because the fruits and veggies, it's fruits and veggies are healthy. You shouldn't be worrying about having a blueberry or not, because you don't want to get out of ketosis. Yeah, so white breads are no bueno. White pastas, not a fan. But complex carbohydrates, so look into the Mediterranean diet. It's more complex. If they're having bread, it's sourdough, it's whole wheat. A lot of the carbs are coming from things like beans and legumes, which are high in fiber. So yeah. Look into the Mediterranean diet, look into different recipes. I think it's also tastier just in general because it's not limiting. It's just more balanced and healthier. And yeah, that's all I had to talk about today. I think this is my last session. So if you guys have any further questions or wondering about something, feel free to message me on Facebook. I'm more than happy to respond. Because these 4 topics of more or less eating are something that I like to talk about, and it's just something that's interesting to me, just because it's something that every animal, every person does, and it affects our body and our fuel, or it affects our mind and our body more than a lot of people think. So that's all I had to say. I'm going to sign off because I'm going to go eat dinner. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Bye.